Thank you very much, Professor Sonn. And we have now some time ahead of us for questions and answers. So those of you who would like to ask a question or make a brief reflection, please raise your hands. Maybe we will collect 2 or 3 reflections or questions, and then we'll give you the time to address them. Felix Corner.
Felix Körner from the Gregorian. Thank you very much for the talk, and in the course of your presentation I started more and more agreeing with your analysis. My question would now be what follows for Muslim life in Western countries. The German experience, as you can hear I'm a German, is that we now see Muslims need spaces in the academia, in the universities to develop their own authentic theology, and they need spaces to transmit their spiritualities, like we Catholicism, we speak of retreat houses, where an experience of God is possible. Where do you see tasks of Western societies to develop so that an authentic Islam can not only condemn things, but develop in a constructive, even prophetic way as counterparts in future projects of free, just societies and the world. Am I making sense, or I only now? Did you understand what
I did. I thought you answered your question.
I mean, you can collect some questions, but then you can think that a better answer than my own.
Elena, just next. Elena Dini next to him, and then I'll bring it here. I've seen you.
So thank you very much for your exposition, and I really appreciated your starting point on showing us actually how many headlines we have and how difficult sometimes it's to go behind the headlines. I'm just wondering if in your research there is also the other side of the coin, that is how actually sometimes from a Muslim point of view there is this way of looking at headlines and having a difficult time in going behind it. I'm also wondering, maybe there is, I suppose there is a big difference between the American context and something like the Italian context. But something we're very much confronted here is this difficulty in knowing more about the Western worldview from a Muslim point of view. And also sometimes we are faced with a not very deep understanding of Islam itself by Muslims. And I'm wondering if you have you made some research about that. Thank you. Oh, and yeah, I was invited to say I'm Elena and I'm a student at the Gregorian.
Here, and then we'll stop with the third question, and then I'll bring it there. Be patient. I've seen you.
I'd like you to explain whether you think it is there is some connection or not of the rise of this kind of extreme interpretation of radical Islam or Islam, or whatever you want to call it, and the spread of a rigorous version of Islam financed by some countries in the Gulf who have been since 73, in fact, when the income from oil exports rise so importantly, well, we have seen how they have financed what the principle could be interpreted as a normal, I don't know, expansion if you want, or spread their own version, building many mosques, be it in Bosnia or elsewhere in the Arab world. And I'm mentioning Bosnia specifically because it's a case which spread some study. But there's the same thing specifically in the Arab world. And the financing of the new Islamic parties, which in principle may be considered a normal Islamic party, Dacca or Muslim Brotherhood, etc. Is there any connection? Well, my name is Florence from the European Institute of Arabi.
From
Barcelona.
Oh, from Barcelona. All good questions, thank you. I think I'll change the order of them. I will start with the last one first, because I think it's a very important question. It is sometimes assumed that Saudi, specifically Wahhabi, financing of mosques and schools internationally is at least correlated with the rise of radical Islam. It's not an irrational correlation. Wahhabi Islam is quite unique. It is a subset of the smallest school of jurisprudence in Sunni Islam. It's a subset of Hanbali Islam. And it began only in the past 200 years. And it was heard of only, as you say, once the oil boom started, because no one paid attention to what had formerly been called the empty quarter. It was empty, they thought, until they discovered what was under all that sand. So there has been a proliferation of schools and mosques supported by Saudis. It's, as you say, a normal missionary activity, well motivated, one would assume, on the part of those people who want to share their wealth. The correlation comes from the fact that Wahhabi law is in some ways the most conservative. It also is unique in not recognizing the legitimacy of Sufi Islam, and which is the deeply spiritual and more mystical approach to Islam that is actually the vehicle whereby Islam spread throughout most of the world. So Wahhabi Islam is unique in not recognizing that, and we saw this very tragic manifestation recently, the bombing of a Sufi mosque in the Sinai within the past few weeks, killing over 300 people. Very, very tragic. And so when we look at the institution that's being attacked and we see fingerprints of certain orientations, I'm not saying that the Wahhabis did that, but that alienation, that antipathy toward Sufis can be correlated with Wahhabi teaching. However, two things to consider. Number one, the vast majority of Wahhabis also condemn terrorism. The vast majority of Wahhabis are not supporters of terrorism. Point one. In fact, Wahhabis are often victimized by terrorism. We saw some of the quotes about condemning Muslims were directed towards Wahhabis, the ones who do the bidding of the West, the slaves of the West. So we have to be very careful about that correlation. Secondly, one of the key markers of this terrorist scourge that we've been talking about is that permission that they take to declare professed Muslims non-Muslims. It's called takfir, meaning, in fact, some of them name their groups after that word, takfir, declaring someone who's a professed Muslim an unbeliever, and therefore worse than someone who never was Muslim to start with, because they were given the gift of Islam and then apostatized. So, and that's capital crime in traditional Islamic law, because it's equivalent to treason. That was articulated in the 1960s in Egypt by a mainstream, generic, meaning fiqh sunnah, and not associated specifically with any school of jurisprudence, ideologue in Egypt, Said Qutb. Said Qutb was the one who was hanged in 1966 for being a terrorist, but it's his validation, or attempt to validate, the process of declaring a Muslim a non-Muslim, and therefore subjecting him to the death penalty, or her, that can be traced to mid-20th century Egypt, not Saudi Arabia. So I think we have to be very careful of making that correlation. But that doesn't mean that it's questionable, or that the opinion that expressed by Wahhabis that Sufis aren't true Muslims is not a minority opinion. It's a minority opinion, but it's not necessarily associated with terrorism. The status of Shi'i Muslims in Wahhabi view is ambiguous. There are some Wahhabis who don't recognize Shia as true Muslims, but there are other Wahhabis who do. So again, we have to be very careful about making this direct correlation. But it's a very, very important question to raise, so thank you for raising that. The second question that I'd like to take is one of my favorite ones by our student from the grade. I alluded to it a little bit in my comments, I think. The terrorists really do think that the West hates Islam and that they want to destroy Islam. They want to wipe it off the face of the earth. Why? Because the terrorists believe that the West secretly knows that the source of strength in Muslim communities is their religion. And so because the West has this history of trying to dominate the world, this is an idea they get from the experience of colonialism, of course, and the current global economic domination by Western powers. The West, they believe, wants to take over the world, and that it's Islam that gives the rest of the Muslim majority world the strength to resist that power. That's, they believe, why the West wants to destroy Islam. They sincerely believe that. So there is that among the terrorists, but that's a minority view, as I've said. More common among non-educated people especially is something we've talked about in our class, and I find it sort of a little bit humorous. Not seriously humorous, it's dark humor. I have dark humor too. But I find conspiracy theories kind of very interesting and sometimes fun because of their predictability. People have preconceived notions of who's at fault of something. The less transparent your government, the less educated you are, the less facility you have with sources so that you can do the scientific and historical and every other kind of research to find out why do these things happen, the more likely you are to do what I used to do all the time freshman year of undergraduate school, sit around with all the girls in the dorm and make up stories about who is at fault for this, who is at fault, and whoever we didn't like, it was her fault. And she did this and she did that, and I failed my test, it's because she kept me awake. We just find an enemy, that becomes the face of our angst, and having spent a great deal of time since graduate school traveling outside of the West, I have found It turns out the United States is at fault for every bad thing that has happened anywhere on earth, but especially in Muslim majority countries, especially in rural areas. There's a flood, United States detonated a nuclear weapon off the coast of India, and that caused a tidal wave which resulted in the flood that we just experienced. What about global warming? Didn't get a chance to study that. I don't need to because I know it's the United States. Now, they probably had help from Israel, because Israel is the collaborator of the United States in being the global enemy. If you are a victim of, and India is often, depending upon where you're from, sometimes the arch enemy changes faces, but sometimes it's Israel, sometimes it's India, but it's always the United States. Always the United States. And at first, it hurt my feelings. Actually, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. The first place I experienced that, Canada. My first graduate program was in Toronto, Pontificio Institute for Medieval Studies. And I didn't know that Canadians had a relatively negative attitude towards Americans.
Yeah, a couple of them present. I warn you.
Well, I had no idea. And I said something, I don't know what it was, but they said, well, you're just saying that because you're American. And I said, well, what would that have to do with it? Well, you Americans. And I thought, oh, that's right. Well, it was the Vietnam War, actually, they were talking about. You Americans, you go around doing this and that, and you don't care what happens to everybody else. And I said, that's not true. Why do you say that? I gradually got used to it. Then when I first did my graduate work in the Middle East, I was just horrified to find that I was at fault for terrible suffering. I mean, it really did hurt my feelings to find out the very negative attitudes towards America. But gradually, I was able to sort of buck up and thicken my skin and realize from their perspective, I could see where that jump would be made. And that recognition was made as I began to realize how hopelessly ignorant I was of the impacts of some of Western policies in formerly colonized countries. There were shreds of credibility in some of these conspiracy theories. Now, I should say, now when I travel in some parts of the world, I have maple leaves on my luggage. Slightly dishonest, but it's safer to be a Canadian. So yes, there is the flip side. And so then going to the third question, what can we do among other things? The part that you addressed, which is to make space in universities, to make space in our communities. Yes, indeed, that's true. Safe spaces. There is a program in the U.S., I'm not sure if it's outside the U.S., Scholars at Risk program. Have people heard of that? Scholars at Risk program. Often the voices of reform in some very, very oppressed regions, those voices of reform, if you're speaking out against an oppressive system or a group that has an iron fist hold on a community, that has terrorized a community, you speak out against them, you're the next victim. It can be very dangerous to speak truth to power in a region dominated by terrorists or by totalitarian governments. And so that's among the practical things we can do, but we can't import everyone who's at risk to safe spaces outside their homelands, nor do people want that. People want their homelands to be safe and secure. They want the safe spaces to be in their own countries. Among the things that we can do to promote that, I think, is that daily by daily quotidian struggle that is democracy, bringing our voices, those of us who know better than to fear all Muslims, bring our voices to bear on our democratic governments to try to support policies that promote social development, economic development, that promote human security, rather than treating all foreign areas where there are terrorists as military targets. The militarist approach to terrorism exacerbates terrorism, as we have clear evidence as we speak. So it is, you know, that old saying, Churchill, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. It is hard work. We have to take that responsibility. Speak up, because we can.
Thank you. We are going to take 3 more questions. I have the gentleman next to Elias, then the gentleman next to Maurice, and then Gaetan. And sorry for the rest. We'll see later on, maybe.
From Nigeria. I'm a Muslim. I'm a student of Nasra Italy. First of all, Islam is not only a religion, but it's a total way of life. Last week in my state, about 50 Muslims were killed by Boko Haram during morning prayers. So, Islam and Muslim is 2 different things. Muslims is like any other person, has a good side and has a good side, bad side. There's no way you can claim to be a Muslim and kill Muslims during prayer. Then you call yourself as a true Muslim. That one aside. Another thing, whenever you are going to talk of Islam, you should please, or you should not talk about Islam, you shouldn't talk about the Muslim, you should talk about Islam. What is the teaching? What is the practice? What is the content and concept of Islam? Islam does not teach all this kind of tourism and other things. But my question is that, why Western world and other Christian communities are not giving us are not giving the genuine Muslim scholars a right of fair hearing? Whenever something happens, you should call the Muslims, genuine Muslims community, to address the issue. Another thing is that we are not also given a chance to an audience to address the community in some critical issues. Why we are not given this chance? If truly we want this world to go we want to build a kind of a strong dialogue community and all that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm Jeevan from India. Speaking from the context of India, of the Muslim community, though it is a relatively, in numbers it's a huge community, and maybe what I'm going to say is more of a reflection, maybe not a question. We see that the mainstream Muslims in India are not radicalized, as you rightly said, and there are reasons also, I agree with all the points you put forth. My reflection is there is a sense of lack of religious leadership among the Muslim community, leadership which is more critical of itself, or more which is looks at its own religion and tries to make critical in the sense, speaks the right tenets of Islam, the principles of Islam, the core of Islam, which I find which is very heartening to see that it is being put in the West, in the States. I don't know why it is not being seen in India. if it was, at least maybe the media is not focusing on it, but still, if it was to some extent, at least it would have been observed. And I don't know my reflection on it. Is it because Islam as a religion, so much strongly professes adherence and allegiance to the Quran, to Islam, that as if to speak something very, a sort of critical attitude or a reflective attitude is not, is as if sacrilege or as if it's a blasphemy, and the common, the simple Muslims, the simple Muslim community is as if would not be willing to accept it which is the true face of Islam. They are maybe due to lack of education, due to lack of this part of a sense of an absence of critical attitude, which I find in the religious leadership of Islam.
Thank you. Gaita, just a question, please, not long intervention.
Thank you. Gaita, Missionary of Africa, your student. My own question has always been, when I take Islam and all these groups, some claim that they don't represent Islam. They claim that they are the real representatives of Islam. My question is, where is the fault line? Where do they get their sources from? Why is it that it is like this? That's the first. The second is, I'm from a Muslim majority country. I live also in the Middle East, Egypt, Sudan, Palestine. And for Christians living on those countries, I wouldn't say they live really with a peaceful heart. There is a kind and there is a real discrimination, which comes from all these countries don't apply Sharia obligatorily, but part of it, of course. So imagining with these missionary movements, Sharia law being applied in the world, and the majority of the Muslims, according to the Pew Research, they want Sharia law, and most of these countries in the Middle East and North Africa, they want it to be applied even to non-Muslims. I get a bit scared. How will it be for others? And where is the discussion about that now? Thank you.
Thank you.
More easy questions. So, letting Muslims speak for themselves. Yes, absolutely true. Sorry? Letting Muslims speak for themselves? What happened? This one? Okay. The first question from Saudu was, why don't we let Muslims speak for themselves? Right. And so that's a very interesting dynamic, isn't it? If we take a microcosm, and we've seen it in our class even this month. We're looking at Voices of Modern Islam. And so we've been reading Muslim voices, reading the works of Muslims. And sometimes there's a tendency to say, well, we don't believe them because they don't really mean it. They're just saying that. They don't really believe in rule of law. Let's look at their regions. There's not rule of law, there's terrorism. So there is, you're right, it's very difficult. There's this phenomenon that's afoot in the United States just now. Do you know the Muslim Brotherhood, of course? There's an effort to get them declared a terrorist organization. A terrorist organization, meaning that, of course, no one who's associated with Muslim Brotherhood would be allowed into the United States, and it could become a criminal offense to provide support for the Muslim Brotherhood, and providing support for the Muslim Brotherhood could be construed as interviewing, studying, analyzing, and publishing the voices of Muslim Brotherhood, which would mean I could be behind bars because I do interview people from Muslim Brotherhood, among others. Now, why would people want to call Muslim Brotherhood terrorists? One of the first quotes that I gave from the post 9/11 condemnations of terrorism was from the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. Why isn't that believed? And numerous other leaders of Muslim Brotherhood, which is a huge and diverse organization, and one need not be a card-carrying member of Muslim Brotherhood to be associated with Muslim Brotherhood. Why would it be assumed that Muslim Brotherhood or anybody associated with is a stealth terrorist? Why is there this skepticism despite what they say? People say, well, they're all terrorists. If I had an answer to your question, I would resign and become an interior decorator. It would be so much easier. Because I keep doing what I'm doing because that question plagues me. Why does this fear, fear is always fear and hatred, flip sides of the same coin. Why does it prevail? And my only answer can be ignorance. I try to replace fear with understanding. I think I've mentioned in class, very interesting report that we have an Islamophobia research project ongoing at Georgetown University. And 2 years ago, we published the first ever Catholic opinion poll about their attitudes towards Muslims. And the poll demonstrated that there was majority fear of Muslims among Catholics in America, and that it was directly correlated with whether or not, with the people who expressed fear were the people who also said they'd never met a Muslim. That portion, which was a minority, of the opinion, the responders, who said, no, they're not afraid of Islam. They recognize similar values with, in this case, Catholicism. Also said they know Muslims. They work with them. They go to school with them. Therefore, they're not afraid of them because they know them. So it's that fear of the unknown, which to me means, it doesn't mean we have to bus people in, it means simply education. So that's why I'm not an interior decorator. Though I'd like to. Questioning leadership. I think I mentioned there's this very interesting annual lectureship at University of Connecticut that deals with the question of leadership, and this year they asked for a discussion of Islamic leadership. Is there a crisis of Islamic leadership? The post-lecture discussion, we got down to, what about leadership in the Christian world? What about leadership in the Catholic world? What about leadership in the secular West? Who speaks for Catholics? Who speaks for America? Who speaks for Jews? And the discussion was so fruitful because what we recognized is that as a global society, we are very polarized. American electorate is quite polarized. Christians are polarized. Catholics are polarized. There is a fear that has infected the global community that has made some people shrink back into their smaller communities, and others venture forward to try to understand the other. And those people who shrink back into their communities condemn those of us who venture forward to speak with the other. Who is it studying Nostra Aetate? Nostra Aetate came out in 1965. We've been working on this a long time. This is a human challenge. It's not just for Catholics, it's not just for Americans, it's not just for Europeans, and it's not just for Muslims. There is polarization in Muslim majority communities as well. We have an enormous challenge ahead of us as human beings. We have made progress. We are here. PISAI is thriving. This is a golden opportunity. Yesterday I was talking with representatives of U.S. Department of State, and they were asking, what can we do to promote dialogue? I said, call Father Diego.
Yes. Great.
So it's a very, very important question, and the answer is we have to keep trying. Finally, what is the fault line? Who is a real Muslim? Who can be identified as the true Muslim? I don't know, but I'll try to answer that question when you can tell me who is the real Christian.
Thank you. I apologize to some of you who would like to ask questions, but it's getting late and Professor Sonn has 2 hours of class tomorrow here, so I don't want to get her more tired than that. So I promise you at the beginning that our rector, Don Valentino Cotini, will join us eventually, and I can see him now trying to hide, but we are going to So, where is the microphone, please? If we can send that microphone to Don Valentino, so to say thank you and just to conclude this gathering. Please, anche in italiano, Valentino.
Ma certo, in italiano. Grazie professoressa Sonn per questa magnifica occasione e per questa magnifica conferenza. Grazie al professor John Borelli che ci ha onorato della sua presenza questa sera e che farà anche delle cose molto buone per il PISAI già questa sera. Grazie a voi tutti che avete partecipato e che partecipato così numerosi. Davvero grazie ancora e buona serata.